That's good. We made it. You guys were patient with me through these conference weeks. Of course, we spent 4 or 5 days covering all 5 of the Power 5 conferences, concluding this week with the SEC, which starts today. So we made it through the ACC, the Big 10, the Big 12, the Pac-12, and finally we have arrived at the conference which most of you, I would guess by reading the comment section, have been looking forward to the most. It is officially SEC week here on YouTube. Hey, good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on YouTube today, so thanks for watching. You know I appreciate it also, and in addition to that as well, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year, and sometimes they're even watchable. Yes, I'm a Georgia fan, I don't try to hide that, but I cover all of college football, and I try to be as fair as balanced as I can, unless your team happens to be playing Georgia the week, during the season in that week, and then of course I have to let you know what the deal is. But listen, this is sort of a trash talk channel. To me, you can't separate trash talk from college football. They just go hand in hand. So try to provide some information to you guys, some entertainment, and some trash talking to go along with it. But subscribe to the channel, give it a shot, watch more than one video. If the first video you watch pisses you off, which is likely in a lot of cases, watch a couple more. Hopefully you'll find that we have a lot of fun around here and you'll stick around. Y'all do me a favor and share this video somewhere, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. I'm trying to get to 20,000 subscribers by the start of the college football season. I do this every offseason about this time. I set a goal for myself on a number of subscribers that I want to try to hit by the time the season starts. You guys helped me out a lot last season, and we ended up hitting my goal about 2 or 3 weeks before the season starts. My goal, 20,000 subscribers this year, and I can't do it without you guys' help. So this video, if there's a video over the last week or so that you really enjoyed, just pick a video, share it somewhere. I would really appreciate it. I'm going to follow the same general pattern that I've done with the other conference week videos, so we're going to rank the coaches. We're going to talk about the top offensive players in the SEC, at least according to me. We're going to talk about some of the games of the year within the SEC. And in today's video, we're going to cover sort of a general topic involving the SEC. And what I've decided to talk about today, I think it's pretty widely agreed that Georgia and Florida are the 2 best teams in the East. And in the West, it's Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M, and a few people are still riding the Barner train. As far as who will win those divisions, obviously Georgia is the favorite, but there are some people going with Florida. Alabama, obviously the favorite in the West. If you're looking for somebody that could upset them and win the West this year, LSU, Texas A&M, and Auburn come to mind. I don't really think there's any other teams in any division that has a legitimate shot to win it this year. That doesn't mean they can't. We see weird and strange things happen in college football all the time. That's part of what we love about college football and part of what attracts us to college football, right? But I'm not going to talk about all 14 teams in this video. I'm going to take what most people consider to be the legitimate contenders in the East and the legitimate contenders in the West, and I'm going to sort of just compare their schedules and try to see who has the best chance of coming out of each one of those divisions as the division winner. All right, we'll start in the East because I think there's, like I mentioned, really just 2 teams in the East that I think have a legitimate shot, 50% or better, I guess, of actually winning the SEC East, and I think that's Florida and Georgia. Now, of course, they're both in the same division, so they are going to play each other. The winner of that game obviously gets a huge leg up in terms of who might win the East. Florida had a good year last year under Dan Mullen, his first year at Florida. Georgia, of course, won the East again under Kirby Smart. They've swept the East 2 years in a row. They haven't lost a game against the SEC East since 2016. Undefeated in 17, undefeated in 18. going 11-1 in both those seasons, with their only losses coming on the road against SEC West teams. Florida up and down last year. You look at the overall, pretty good. They go 10-3, win a big bowl game at the end against Michigan, but some head-scratching losses too. Losing at home to Kentucky for the first time in 32 years, blown out by Missouri, blown out by Georgia. Now, the Georgia loss, nothing embarrassing about losing to Georgia. Georgia was a pretty good team last year. The game wasn't even very close, though. Losing, 36-17, so he lost by 19, an improvement over the year before, but still not all that close. Hard to understand the loss to Kentucky, especially when you saw how well Florida played at other parts of the season. And the Mizzou thing is really a head-scratcher. Florida has gotten not only beat, but completely blown out by Missouri 2 years in a row. When you look at Georgia, they've run through the East the last 2 years with really not even any close games. I think the average margin of victory for Georgia against SEC East teams over the last 2 years is about 26 points. So the games haven't even been close. Where Georgia has struggled, and this has been a theme under Kirby Smart, Georgia has lost their road game against the SEC West every single year under Kirby Smart, currently sitting at 0-3. 2016, they lose on the road to Ole Miss, but beat Auburn at home. 2017, they lose to Auburn on the road, but destroy Mississippi State at home. 2018, they lose to LSU on the road and beat Auburn at home. So 1-1 in the regular season every single year for Kirby Smart against the SEC West, with the 3 wins coming at home and the 3 losses coming on the road. So when we get to looking at these schedules, those are some things we're going to have to pay attention to. But let's start with Florida here. Not going to talk about games like Florida versus Florida State, Florida versus Miami, because, you know, regardless of which way those games go, they have no impact on who wins the SEC East, and that's what we're talking about here today. So you look at Florida's schedule. 4 conference road games. I always like to look at road games in every conference, but particularly in the SEC. Some of the toughest road environments to play in are in the SEC. So let's look at Florida's road schedule: at Kentucky, at LSU, at South Carolina, at Missouri. Florida is a better team than Kentucky. They were a better team than Kentucky last year, I think. That was just, you know, weird things happen like we talked about. I do think Florida will be favored in this game. Has Kentucky got the mental monkey off their back when it comes to Florida? If you watched Florida and Kentucky play over the last 3 or 4 years, really, Kentucky has had a pretty good opportunity to win several of those games against Florida. They've been close games in the second half, 2 times in particular at Florida. Florida scores real late Wednesday. It might have even been overtime, was it? I don't remember. It was a couple of years ago. But anyway, I think it was 3 years ago. Doesn't matter. And then, of course, a couple of years ago, Florida on the road at Kentucky. Kentucky dominated that entire game, and a couple of just mental breakdowns by the coaches really cost Kentucky that game. Twice in that game, Kentucky played defense with only 10 men, completely uncovering a Florida wide receiver who caught touchdowns both times, uncontested. It was, I mean, you had to feel bad for Kentucky, but really a middle school mistake there by the coaching staff, not recognizing what was going on and taking timeouts or whatever they needed to do to fix that. But the point is, Kentucky has played Florida really good several times over the last 3 or 4 years, finally getting a big win last year on the road in the Swamp. Revenge game for Florida this year on the road at Kentucky. Kentucky's going to want to win this game. I hear from Kentucky fans in the offseason. They don't seem bothered by the fact that they lost 2 of the best players they've had in the last 40 years, one on offense and one on defense, running back Benny Snell and outside linebacker / defensive end Josh Allen. I don't think Kentucky can repeat what they did last year. I don't think Kentucky's going to fall off the map. I think they've recruited okay, especially if you look at where they typically recruit throughout the course of their history. I think they've got some talent on that team. I don't think they can replace Snell and Allen, though. I think Florida will be a favorite in this game. I think Florida is a better team. At LSU, that's going to be tough. I think LSU is a really good team this year. We're going to talk about them in a few minutes when we get to the West. They return a lot on offense. They lose a lot on defense, but LSU is kind of like Alabama on the defensive side of the ball anyway. It seems like every year the NFL is poaching players from LSU, juniors, seniors, whatever. But it never really seems to have that big of an effect. LSU recruits at an elite level within the top 5 multiple times over the last few years, top 10 almost every single year. Ton of talent on that team on defense. Yes, they lose some greats, Devin White, Greedy Williams. They've been able to replace those guys in the past. If they can replace them again this year and the offense can take another step forward, LSU is going to be a dangerous team. This was a great game last year in Florida that Florida won. Hard to pick Florida in this one right now. This game comes about midway through the season, so we'll have a lot to go on by then, but I think most people right now, outside of Florida fans, would be looking at this game as an LSU win. On the road at South Carolina. I don't expect South Carolina to have a very good season this year. Part of that is due to their schedule. It's not that I think South Carolina is a terrible team, but they have a brutal schedule. They got to play Georgia, Clemson, Alabama, LSU, Florida. I don't know why I said LSU. Texas A&M. Those are all top 15 teams, in my opinion. Hard to see a way that South Carolina wins more than 6 or 7 games this year. But it's on the road for Florida at South Carolina, a game that South Carolina could have won last year and probably should have won. Florida eked it out in the end. South Carolina, not an easy place to play. Definitely the top half of home field advantages in terms of SEC stadiums. We'll see what kind of shape these two teams are in at this point in the season when this game comes around. I wouldn't pick Florida in a blowout here, but I would assume Florida is the better team and is probably going to be favored there. And then you finish up your last road game of the year at Mizzou. I don't know what's going on with Florida and Mizzou. Florida clearly a better program, better team, recruits better, better coaches, everything than Mizzou. Mizzou has beat Florida like 100-40 over the last 2 years. I mean, the last 2 games between Florida and Mizzou have been absolutely ugly. Blowouts. Mizzou has moved up and down the field, thrown for tons of yards. It's just been ugly games to watch for Florida. They go on the road this year at Mizzou. Of course, they got Kelly Bryant this year. They can't play in a bowl game this year. This is one of their last games of the season here. This will basically be their bowl game here. Home game against Florida. My guess is that Florida will be a top 10 or top 15 team, depending on how many games they lose prior to this in the season. I think that's a tough out for Florida to get. Again, I think Florida's the better team. I think they'll probably be favored. But watch the last 2 Florida versus Missouri games. It wasn't smoke and mirrors. Florida got absolutely destroyed the last 2 years by an average to below average Missouri team. So I don't think any Florida fan should be looking at this game and circling it as an automatic win, although I do think you're the better team. All in all, I think this is a pretty tough schedule here. Even if Florida were to beat Georgia, I don't see Florida running the table here. I have the prediction videos coming up here in a couple of weeks, and I'm sure I'll do Florida. It's hard for me to see more than 10 wins on here right now. I think 10-2 is about as high as you could go with this schedule here. We talked about the road games. You got Tennessee at home. You catch Auburn from the West, but you get them at home. You'd have to win both of those for sure. So can Florida win the East? Yes. But I think they're going to have to bank on Georgia dropping a couple of games because I can't see Florida putting together an 11-1 or 12-0 type of season. I just don't see it. So let's look at Georgia's schedule and see if there's a way Florida can finish higher. Look at Georgia's road games. They open up week 1 on the road at Vandy. You got to assume that's a Georgia win. We beat them by about 30 points a year the last couple of years. We're on the road at Tennessee, another team that we've dominated over the last couple of years. Jeremy Pruitt in year 2. I do think Tennessee will be a better team this year. Of course, they went 5-7 last year. I expect Tennessee to probably flip that around this year and maybe go 7-5, somewhere in that neighborhood. I do think they should make a bowl game this year. But, of course, they got to play Georgia. They got to play Alabama. They got to play Florida. So you would think, Georgia's probably a favorite there, expected to win that game. UGA also plays on the road at Auburn. Talked about that in the beginning of the video. Pencil that in for a loss if you want. I think Georgia's the better team. I think they'll be favored, but look what Georgia's done on the road in the SEC West the last few years. It hasn't been pretty. I'm hoping, even though I think we're a better team than Auburn, I'm hoping Auburn has a bunch of losses at this point in the season. I think Gus Malzahn could be on his way out with another mediocre to below average year this year. I'm hoping by the time this game is played, which is really late in the season, that the Auburn fans have basically given up. I'm hoping Auburn is already sitting on a couple of losses, maybe to Florida and LSU, maybe even Texas A&M, whatever the case may be, and has pretty much given up. That would make me more comfortable going into that game on the road at Auburn. But if you're looking at past history, you got to give Auburn a chance in that game. So what else do we have? So that's at Vandy, at Tennessee, and at Auburn. I don't see any worse than 2-1 there for Georgia, probably. The home games, South Carolina, Kentucky, Florida, and Missouri. Well, Florida's a neutral site game in Jacksonville. Mizzou's beat us one time since they joined the SEC back in 2011 or 2012, whatever it was. So we just had their number for whatever reason. Same can be said for Kentucky. If Kentucky was going to beat Georgia, I think last year was the year they were hot, they were on fire. We went up to Kentucky and sort of just ran them off the field there. Mizzou, Kelly Bryant. We'll see how he develops as a passer this year. I'm not very high on Kelly Bryant. He just hasn't proven to me that he can be a very good passer of the football. We'll see. I can't imagine Georgia. It would be a huge disappointment if Georgia went worse than 11-1 in my mind. 10-2 would be a disappointment at this point for Georgia. I think if you are a Florida fan or you're somebody that is wanting or thinking Florida's going to win the SEC East, then I think Florida would have to go 11-1 with a win over Georgia. Because I can't see Georgia going any worse than 11-1. So let's say they were to lose to Florida and finish 11-1. If Florida was also 11-1 or only had the one SEC loss, of course, Florida would win the tiebreaker. So I do think both of those teams have a legitimate shot and a legitimate argument to make in terms of winning the SEC East. It would be a huge disappointment if Georgia didn't win it, though. Just being real here, I think everyone is going to be going with Georgia to win the East this year. They're loaded. They get a ton back on offense and defense. Got some issues to work out at wide receiver, but generally speaking, Georgia's the better team. Florida's lost half of its 2019 recruiting class. They can't qualify. They've transferred out. They've quit, whatever the case may be. Not a good offseason for Florida. Georgia had its fair share of issues, too. Several arrests back in March. Jeremiah Holloman kicked off the team a couple of weeks ago. That kind of stuff happens in the offseason, but I think everyone would agree that right now Georgia is a better team. That doesn't mean they'll win that game against Florida, but I think everyone would agree that Georgia should be the favorite to win the East. Now, when you look at the SEC West, I think it's a lot more complicated to digest. I think Bama, LSU, and Texas A&M are all three legitimate top 15 teams with at least an opportunity to win the SEC West. If you want to throw Auburn in there, fine. I'm going to go ahead and eliminate two of these teams right off the bat, though, so I don't have to spend a whole lot of time talking about them, and that's Auburn and Texas A&M. I'm eliminating them based on their schedule and the fact that in Auburn's case, I just don't think they're going to be a very good team. They're starting a quarterback that's never played before. They got to play on the road at Texas A&M, on the road at Florida, and on the road at LSU. Auburn could easily go 0-3 in that stretch. 1-2 is very likely. 2-1 would be a minor miracle in my opinion. 3-0, I see zero chance of that happening. Then you got home games at the end of the year against Georgia and Alabama. I know Auburn went on that run late in 2017, 2 seasons ago, where they beat Georgia and Alabama at home in a 3-week period and ended up making the SEC championship game. I don't see the stars aligning like that again this year for Auburn. I just don't see it. Brand new quarterback. Gus Malzahn, I think, if he catches a couple of losses in the first half of the season, the fans are going to be beating the guy's door down, trying to run him out of town. You're going to have fans renting U-Hauls and parking them outside his house. It's just going to get ugly in Auburn if things don't go well first 6 weeks of the season. And I think by the time we get to this Georgia and Bama game, for all intents and purposes, the season will already be over for Auburn. I'm going to scratch them off right now. Texas A&M, I'm going to scratch them off for a different reason. Their schedule is way too difficult to win the division. It's not a knock on Texas A&M. I think they're a good team. I think Jimbo Fisher is a great coach. Going to rank the coaches for you on tomorrow's video, but I think Jimbo Fisher is an elite level coach. I don't like him as a person or a human being. I think he did some sketchy, shady things at Florida State that I don't agree with. We'll see if he brings that sort of same attitude and philosophy to Texas A&M. He's only been there 1 year so far. Pretty good year last year. But listen to this schedule. I know we're talking about winning divisions here, so non-con games don't matter, but they got to travel to Clemson. They got to travel to Ole Miss. They got to travel to Georgia and to LSU. And at Georgia and at LSU are their last 2 games of the season. Those come late in November. Those are going to be borderline impossible games to win, in my opinion, for Texas A&M. I just don't see them. If you look at the Texas A&M's history in the SEC over the last 7 or 8 years since they joined, late season collapses almost every single year. This is a brutal. There aren't very many teams in America that could play at Georgia and at LSU in back-to-back weeks and win either of those games, much less both of them. Your home games, You get the Barn at home. I think that's a 50-50 game. You probably win. You get Bama at home. Now, I can see a scenario for Texas A&M where they beat Alabama. I think it could be a thing where they're so hyped up, the crowd is so into it, this game is circled. It'll be a huge home game, especially if Texas A&M finds a way to make it to that game with 0 or 1 losses, keeping in mind that they got to play on the road at Clemson in, I believe, week 2. Most people consider that a loss for Texas A&M, but if they turn around then and beat the Barn in Arkansas is a neutral site deal. And they're sitting, they're hosting Bama here, who will probably be undefeated, and they're sitting at 0 or 1 losses. Texas A&M is. I could see a scenario where Texas A&M even knocked Bama off. I'm not predicting that to happen, but I think Texas A&M is a good enough team to beat some of these really good teams on their schedule. They're not good enough or consistent enough, though, to run the table to the point of winning the division. The schedule is just too hard. South Carolina at home, Mississippi State at home, Bama at home, Arkansas at home, Auburn at home. You're probably going to lose 1 or 2 of those would be my guess. And then on the road, you'll beat Ole Miss, I think. But at UGA, at LSU, I just think those 2 games back-to-back at the end of the season is absolutely brutal. And you throw a trip to Clemson in there, which doesn't affect the West, but affects your overall record. I think Texas A&M could be one of the best 7-5 teams in the history of college football, but they're not winning the West. That leaves us with Alabama and LSU, the 2 teams that everyone is picking out of the West. Most people are going with Bama. If you're looking for somebody to upset Bama, they're going with LSU. Problem with LSU, they were really good last year, and they lost at home 29-0. And offense has been LSU's issue for a long time now, going back to when they lost Jamarcus Russell. It seems like they just have a hard time putting a dynamic offense on the field that really scares anybody. They've had a couple of big wins at home over the last couple of years, most notably to Georgia last year. But you look at their schedule, on the road at Vandy, should be a win. At Mississippi State, I think that should be a win. I think Mississippi State is heading in the wrong direction. On the road at Alabama, almost an impossible spot here. Like I said, the game wasn't even close last year. I know LSU gets Burrow back and some offensive pieces. They're always loaded on defense. But if you look at last year's game, it just wasn't even close. I think LSU's defense played probably the best game it has played in years against Alabama last year. Still gave up the 29 points, and offensively, it was just a pitiful performance. I mean, it just was absolutely horrible. They just could do nothing. You look at their home schedule, home against Florida, huge game. Lose that one, I think the chances of them winning the West are pretty much over at that point. Home against Auburn, I would consider them to be a pretty sizable favorite in that game against Auburn. Home against Arkansas, again, a favorite. And home against Texas A&M, which is a game that I think could go either way, honestly. One of the wildest games we've seen in a long time last year, LSU and Texas A&M, 6-7 overtimes. LSU fans, I know, remember that one because they're not happy at all with somebody officiating in that game. But so that brings us to Bama. On the road at South Carolina. South Carolina fan is going to remind us every single day from now until this game is played that they beat Alabama the last time they played. That's great. I think that was in 2010 or 2011. It's not happening this year. South Carolina, not a great team this year, I don't think. I think Bama rolls in that game. Bama's got to play on the road at Texas A&M. I already talked a lot about that game. I could see that. If you're looking for Alabama to go 11-1, that's the game, right? Home against Tennessee, own them since pretty much anyone can remember. Home against LSU, just talked about that. On the road at Mississippi State, I mentioned they're heading in the wrong direction. Bama will win that one. On the road at Auburn, I talked about the struggles I think they're going to have this year and the state that program's going to be in at the end of the year. I can't see Auburn winning that game right now. This is not 2017 all over again. So that's pretty much it. Florida or Georgia out of the East, Bama or LSU out of the West. I'll be making official prediction videos coming up starting about a week from now. But I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, to me, Georgia is the clear favorite to come out of the East, and Alabama is the clear favorite to come out of the West. Last year, that's what happened. Georgia was the clear favorite going into the season. Alabama was the clear favorite going into the season. That's who came out of the East, and that's who came out of the West. That's great news if you're a Georgia or Alabama fan. The bad news is that's the first time that the consensus favorites have won both the East and the West in the same year in like 10 years or something. Are the chances of that happening again good or bad? I don't know. Like I said, I'll tell you this. I think it's closer in the East than it is in the West. I just don't see LSU getting it done this year and winning that division. I think Bama will win the West. I think Georgia will win the East too, but I think it's a closer contest in the East right now than I do the West. If things continue to go bad at Florida off the field, though, with some recruit, look, this is going to hurt their depth. Florida, I mean, you can't lose 5-6 players from a signing class and act like it's going to have no impact at all. It could, especially late in the season when you're looking at injuries and things like that, depth, rotating people in and out. We'll see. I do think Florida's a good team with the potential to beat UGA, but I don't think Florida, again, is good enough to go 11-1, and I think that's what they would have to do, would have went over Georgia to win the East. I can't see that happening. I could see 9-3 or 10-2. I think Georgia is probably 11-1 or 12-0 team again this year. We'll see, but anyway, two of the most interesting divisions in college football, I think, right, especially on this channel, which is dominated by primarily SEC fans. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I know there's going to be a lot of disagreement and stuff like that in the comment section of this video, but it's impossible to talk about these division races and have everyone agree with me. So I get it. So feel free to tell me down below where I'm wrong about either Georgia, Florida, Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M, or Auburn. Let me know. Is there any other team you guys think have even a 10 or 15% chance of winning these divisions? Come on, I don't think so. But all right, I appreciate you guys watching. Video 1 of SEC week is done. Several more to go. Going to do the same thing we did. We're going to rank the coaches. We're going to talk about the top offensive players. We're going to talk about the games of the year, all that kind of stuff coming up real soon over the next couple of days. I appreciate you guys watching and have a great morning.